Let's dive into a discussion about one of my favorite PS1 exclusive titles. Developed and published by Konami, Forbidden Memories came out in Japan at the tail end of 1999 and the rest of the world in 2002. The game setting has us split our time between ancient Egypt, where we play as the Pharaoh, aka the spirit of the Millennium Puzzle, and present-day Domino City, where we play as Yu-Gi-Oh! Series main protagonist, Yugi Muto. The game also has us splitting our time between visual novel, the main vehicle for plot developments, and card game simulator, the main driver of game progression. And while during the campaign and free duel we are stuck playing against the computer and all the RNG goodness that goes along with it, Forbidden Memories also allows for co-op play via two-player mode and a trading mode, the latter of which can be exploited to speed up the card collecting process for endgame. Before I explain why I love this game so gosh darn much, let's get some of the more unsightly qualities out of the way. First and foremost, the gameplay is far from impressive, especially for a title that came out toward the end of the PS1's lifespan. If you compare the watered-down version of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Card game we get here versus the TCG or even the game as presented in the anime, we are extremely limited. Probably the most glaring limitation that draws our attention to the unmistakable cheapness of the overall experience is the fact that we can only summon or set one card per turn. Yeah, in a game that has you go toe-to-toe with villains who can drop Blue Eye's Ultimate Dragon on the first turn because sacrifices aren't a requirement, we are stuck in the slow lane playing one thing per turn. Now, if you start with the advantage and get your opponent on the defensive right out of the gate, you can set magics, traps, and monsters, slowly fortifying yourself against whatever your opponent has in store for you. But that gets exponentially harder to do as you progress through the game, which is understandable. We like things to progressively get more challenging. It only makes our victory over the big bad that much more satisfying. Big fucking however, let's talk about the elephant in the room. My mentioning of Blue Eye's Ultimate Dragon was highly intentional. There are extremely powerful cards like the aforementioned that we do not have access to, but the computer does. Couple that annoying fact with the tomfuckery that is RNG, and we've got a recipe for disaster on our hands. In all fairness, you can technically summon Blue Eye's Ultimate Dragon via ritual summon, but that's a mechanic in the game that is almost entirely useless because it takes too damn long to get all your blue-eyed ducks in a row. But Raven, why not use Swords of Revealing Light to guarantee a successful ritual summoning? To that I say, well, you can't. Well, technically you can, but you have to fuse two lesser spells to create it while, again, your opponents just have Swords of Revealing Light at their beck and call. I get that this creates some challenge, but good lord, the game gets wildly unfair toward the end, especially since you have to duel like 6 people back to back with no opportunity to save in between, and all that's standing between you and a game over screen is a bad first hand. The last negative I'll say about the gameplay has to do with how short the game actually is. There is not much to this game at all. Don't get me wrong, it was nice to see some familiar faces and new ones, and the free duel roster does actually get pretty expansive by the end of the game. That being said, I can almost guarantee that you will spend over half of your gameplay hours simply trying to get the best cards to make victory that much more achievable by endgame. Maybe even longer if you don't use the memory card exploit. If there's anything worse in this game's RNG, it's got to be those drop rates. You will amass so many low-level, useless cards as you desperately look at the victory screen over and over again, hoping and praying for a Meteor Black Dragon. And if you're not just looking to brute force your way to victory with powerful monsters, you'll have an even worse time trying to get the best magic and trap cards in the game as well. I know there are smarter ways to S-Tech, but I'm too dumb. I could only ever figure out how to do it by decking out my opponent. I'll leave the explanation of the PAL/tech mechanic to someone far smarter than I. But yeah, if I hadn't committed to doing a full playthrough on my channel, I probably would have put the game down out of sheer mind-numbing boredom a long time ago. Getting your deck endgame ready is just way too much of a Sisyphean task. Other than that, the visual novel aspect of the game is serviceable. It presents a decent narrative with stakes and intrigue, but there's really nothing that mind-blowing about it at all. But hey, doesn't really need to be. We're here for the card game and the beauty of the sport, and the love of the game, or what the fuck ever. I do wish it had been voice acted though. I'm not sure what sort of limitations existed. I've played other Yu-Gi-Oh titles like Capsule Coliseum that did use the official voice actors, so I'm not sure what the deal was with this one. Maybe it just wasn't popular enough yet? I mean, the anime we all first saw on Kids WB, aging myself significantly, only premiered in the States about a year before this game's release, so yeah, maybe that had something to do with it. Either way, not that big a deal. Didn't expect all that much out of the story, so not too big of a disappointment. With the negatives out of the way, let's talk about some of the things I really love about this game. To keep the structure parallel, we'll start with the gameplay, which will require us going back to, as Cosmo and Wanda would say, the rules. While the card game as presented in Forbidden Memories is significantly watered down from the official rules of the TCG, like this game doesn't even fuck with effect monsters, there were some interesting mechanics that kept things fresh, at least for me. When you first fire up the game and get your starting deck, you'll notice it's crawling with almost nothing but puny weaklings. But as you battle your way through career or free duel mode, you'll inevitably observe your opponent combining cards from his or her hand to fuse more powerful monsters. This will lead you to a compelling sink or swim moment where, if you're brave enough, you'll try your hand, pun intended, at fusing as well. What I love about this is that there are interesting rules to the fusions that are somewhat consistent, somewhat not. For example, sometimes it's enough for a monster card to have dragon in the name, and sometimes it's not. It depends on what the developers thought the most quintessential element of a monster was. Is Dragon Zombie more dragon or zombie? Depends on what you're fusing it with. While this could be baffling, it was also very interesting insight into the minds of the devs that fascinated the ever-loving shit out of me. And don't even get me started on fusions involving magic and trap cards. Good lord, were those kinda kooky. Like, these devs absolutely had a freaky side and I was here for it. Like, 2 Muyen curries make bad reaction to smochi? I guess they were going for a too much of a good thing type of scenario, but that's just hecka fascinating. Another interesting element of gameplay was the astrological designation component. Each monster card has a choice between 2 signs, and it was fun to learn which opponents would summon a monster under which sign. It was also cool to live in a world where Dark Magician truly could go toe-to-toe with a Blue Eyes White Dragon because hell yeah, nerdy wizards with funny hats are cooler than glorified lizards with wings. Want to make Seto Second go crying back to Heishin? Throw your Dark Magician down under Mercury and watch that little bitch cower. Interesting side note though, the computer must have had an attack power threshold for throwing things in defense mode, because no matter how many times I summoned the Dark Magician, or even something more powerful that could at least match the Blue Eyes White Dragon's attack power, the computer would default to summoning that or something more powerful in face down attack position. Just something interesting I noticed while dueling Kaiba over 50 times for one measly widespread ruin. But yeah, astrology rocks, yo! Anywho, the last thing I want to mention is the sheer amount of love the team clearly had for Yu-Gi-Oh! You may not love playing this game. It may be too tedious for you, and that's okay. It's actually pretty reasonable. Again, this is a watered-down experience, and the game is pretty bare bones compared to other late PS1 titles. That being said, give yourself the opportunity to look through the card library. Kinda like different Pokédex entries in various Pokemon titles, the card descriptions aren't identical to the flavor text printed on the normal monster trading cards. But the really noteworthy thing to pay attention to is the sheer amount of effort it must have took the team to design a 3D in-game model of every single monster. This is a feat to behold, and it absolutely deserves recognition and appreciation. On top of that, by switching up your button inputs in a duel, you can initiate a 3D battle because, again, this is real sorcery we're dealing with, at least in ancient Egypt. The amount of time and effort it must have taken to not only create 3D models of all of the monsters, but also give them battle animations is probably the most impressive accomplishment of this entire game. And what I love about that is that it has absolutely no bearing on the actual gameplay experience. In fact, you can complete the game without ever engaging with it or even realizing it's there. The team truly did it for the love of Yu-Gi-Oh! This may not be the best Yu-Gi-Oh! Game out there, but Forbidden Memories will always have a special place in my heart because it's clear to me that the team was just as much in love with Yu-Gi-Oh! As I am. That being said, am I raring to fire this one up again? Not anytime soon.